Hello everyone and welcome to Evolution of Resident Evil games. Resident Evil is a 1996 survival horror game. Developed by Capcom for PS1, players control Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, members of the elite task force SDARS, who must escape a mansion infested with zombies and other monsters. Resident Evil 2 was released in 1998. The player controls rookie Copley on S. Kennedy and college student Claire Redfield, who must escape Raccoon City after its citizens are transformed into zombies by a biological weapon. Resident Evil 3: Nemesis was released in 1999. The game takes place almost concurrently with the events of Resident Evil 2. The player must control former lead agent Jill Valentine as she escapes from Raccoon City, which has been infected by a virus. Resident Evil Survivor is a 2000 light gun shooter video game. Developed by TOS, player takes control of an amnesiac protagonist, struggling desperately against overwhelming odds to stay alive and uncover his identity. Resident Evil Code Veronica was released in 2000. The game follows Claire Redfield and her brother Chris Redfield in their efforts to survive a viral outbreak at a remote prison island in the Southern Ocean and a research facility in Antarctica. Resident Evil Survivor 2: Code Veronica was released in 2001. The game is adapted from Resident Evil, Code, Veronica and features enemies and characters from that game and enemies from Resident Evil 2 and 3. Resident Evil is a 2000 survival horror video game. Developed by Capcom for GameCube, it's a remake of the 1996 game. The game retains the same graphical presentation, with 3D models superimposed over pre-rendered backgrounds. Resident Evil 0 was released in 2002. The story takes place in July 1998 and follows Officer Rebecca Chambers, as well as convict Billy Cohen as they explore an abandoned training facility for employees of the pharmaceutical company Umbrella. Resident Evil: Dead Aim is a 2003 light gun shooter video game developed by Cavia. Dead Aim uses a third-person view when moving and switches to a first-person view when aiming and firing a weapon, with a dot in the center of the screen to help the player aim. Resident Evil Outbreak was released in 2004. Outbreak depicts a series of episodic storylines in a zombie-inhabited Raccoon City. Players control 8 characters with unique abilities, set during the time period as Resident Evil 2 and 3. Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2 was released in 2005. The game takes place in zombie-infested Raccoon City with the same 8 characters that were featured in its predecessor, along with 5 new scenarios. Resident Evil 4 was released in 2005. Players control the special agent Leon S. Kennedy on a mission to rescue the U.S. President's daughter, who has been kidnapped by a religious cult in rural Spain. Leon fights hordes of enemies infected by a mind-controlling parasite. Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles was released in 2007 on Wii. The game exposes the Umbrella Corporation's meddling throughout the Resident Evil series through narration from Albert Wesker, a former Umbrella scientist. Resident Evil 5 is a 2009 third-person shooter video game. Developed by Capcom. The plot involves an investigation of a terrorist threat by Bioterrorism Security Assessment. Alliance agents Chris Redfield and Sheva Alomar in Kijuju, a fictional region of West Africa. Resident Evil: The Darkside Chronicles was released in 2009. The game revolves around the personal stories and tragedies in the Resident Evil series. The game is composed of 4 scenarios that retell and recapitulate the events of Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica. Resident Evil Revelations was released in 2012. The game follows counterterrorism agents Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield as they try to uncover the truth behind a bioterrorist organization that plans to infect the Earth's oceans with a virus. Resident Evil. Operation Raccoon City is a 2012 squad-based third-person shooter video game. The game follows a group of elite paramilitary private military contractors for the Umbrella Corporation during the zombie outbreak in Raccoon City. Resident Evil 6 was released in 2012. Players control Leon Kennedy, Chris Redfield, Jake Muller, and Ada Wong as they confront the force behind a worldwide bioterrorist attack. The story is centered around their interwoven campaigns. Resident Evil. Revelations 2 is an 2015 episodic survival horror video game developed and published by Capcom. It marks the return of Claire Redfield as the protagonist, and the first time Barry Burton is a playable story character in the main series. Umbrella Corps is a 2016 tactical shooter game developed and published by Capcom. Umbrella Corps is a competitive multiplayer shooter that features zombies. Players play as a mercenary from 2 different corporations. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is a 2017 survival horror game. The player controls Ethan Winters as he searches for his long-missing wife in a derelict plantation, occupied by an infected family. Solving puzzles and fighting enemies, it is the first main Resident Evil game to use a first-person view.
What the fuck is this? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Resident Evil 2 is a remake of the 1998 game, released in 2019 on modern platforms, unlike the remake of the first game, which sought to update and improve the original experience. This remake reimagines the gameplay and story for modern audiences. Resident Evil 3 is a remake of the 1999 game released in 2020. The game is played from a third-person perspective and requires the player to solve puzzles and defeat monsters. While being pursued by a creature called Nemesis, certain sections require the player to control a supporting character Carlos Oliveira. Resident Evil Village was released in 2021. Players control Ethan Winters, who searches for his kidnapped daughter in a village filled with mutant creatures. Village maintains survival horror elements from previous games, with players scavenging environments for items and managing resources. Resident Evil 4 is a remake of the 2005 game released in 2023. The remake has an updated plot, new visuals, characters, cast, and altered gameplay. In some sequences, Leon must protect the president's daughter Ashley. She uses a simpler health system